Far More Than We Think, Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 23. The Long Arm of the Law. I've always been generally familiar with scientific laws and acutely aware of the legal laws that govern our society. It was not until recently, though, that I became aware of what are known as spiritual laws. I'm not talking here about the Ten Commandments or other religious laws, but a set of laws that define how the world works in ways that were hitherto unknown to me. I have no idea why they were unknown to me, but they were. It turns out that these spiritual laws are far more important than all the others put together. On first examination, these laws seem far too good to be true. But when seen from a spiritual perspective, they actually make perfect sense. Not only do they make sense, they provide yet more exciting reasons why spirituality is such a positive life choice. Before we delve into a selection of the various laws, we should first remind ourselves of the possibilities that spiritual thinking opens up for us. We've seen that matter is in fact energy vibrating at vast numbers of different frequencies, and we've seen that thought, sense, emotion and spirit are also energy. Everything in the universe can be seen as energy in one form or another. We've moved through the spectrum of spirituality to conclude that love is the universal life force that underpins everything. With these building blocks in place, it's quite easy to see the possibility that loving thought can be creative. I'm not talking about being creative in just an artistic way, but creative as in making things happen. This may sound too incredible to even contemplate, but the logic is that the energy of loving thought can influence and change the vibration of matter itself. This is easy to dismiss as nonsense, but we only have to think about faith healing, placebos and other numerous examples of mind over matter to conclude that something inexplicable does take place. Our assumption is that these phenomena are rare and unique and not available to us as individuals, but the laws outlined below indicate that actually these capabilities are universal. People who display incredible talents are not so much uniquely gifted, but have found a way to access the creative power that lies within. If a faith healer believes he has the power to heal, and a patient believes the healer has such power, then miracles happen. Human beings have the power to change reality through their focused thoughts. To my knowledge, science has yet to find conclusive evidence to support the idea of mind over matter, but history tells us scientific knowledge will continue to evolve. The progress of science has and will uncover previously unexpected or inexplicable phenomena. Science seems to be edging ever closer to spiritual principles, and it would not surprise me at all if one day we find explanations for the supposedly inexplicable. Meanwhile, we have plenty of anecdotal evidence to support spirituality, not the least of which for me is the fact that my health, wealth, relationships, emotional sobriety and happiness have all remarkably improved since I embrace the idea that I can tap into the universal source of all that is. The laws outlined in this chapter explain why this may be the case. Number one on any list of spiritual laws has to be the law of attraction. This simple but powerful law, which has similarities to the scientific law of gravity, states that which is like unto itself is drawn, or put more simply, like attracts like. This does not sound particularly remarkable at first, but the implications here are potentially profound. The proposition here is that human thought attracts that which it contains, or in other words, we get what we think about. This applies equally to positive and negative thoughts, and alarmingly, it applies whether we want it to or not. The law of attraction is not something that we can magically summon when we want something nice to happen, but it operates continually and will give us what we are thinking about, whether or not we like the outcome. The thoughts do not necessarily have to impact straight away, but rather have an influence on our reality over a period of time. A single thought will have a small impact, but consistent focused thoughts over weeks and months will impact more profoundly. If we imagine each thought as a stitch, our thinking over time creates a unique tapestry. The other thing to consider here is that the brain comprises the conscious and subconscious minds, and both transmit thoughts as energy into the world. We may like to think we keep our thoughts to ourselves, but the brain continuously transmits its electrical signals, and these can bring about unintended consequences. This all sounds like science fiction and total fantasy at first, but there are many everyday real-life examples, both exciting and disturbing, that have caused me to rethink things. Starting on a positive note, the law of attraction says we will get what we think about, so surely we can all think our lives better, whatever that actually means. This gives credence to the various schools of positive thinking and affirmations that seem particularly popular with successful people. Athletes and other top achievers use all sorts of techniques to get into the focused zone of top performance, and there are countless examples of people who have transformed their lives through positive thinking. And we should also mention prayer here, because whatever our religious beliefs may or may not be, there's no doubt that regular prayer brings about focused and consistent thought on whatever subject we happen to be praying about. Prayer is effectively a combination of affirmation and positive thinking, but we shall see later that it can be fraught with pitfalls. The thing about positive thinking is that we have to believe in what we are thinking about in order for it to work. There's no point trying to force ourselves to think positively about any particular attribute of our lives if deep down we don't believe ourselves worthy of good things, or if we don't really believe in positive thinking in the first place. We have to believe we are worthy and believe that it will work, and then we give ourselves a fighting chance. We have to love ourselves in order to attract good things into our lives, and we have to completely trust that our thoughts can make a difference. Our thoughts will make a difference whether we believe them or not, but the more belief we have, the stronger the impact. We need to do this on a conscious and subconscious level, otherwise the brain will give out mixed signals. Spirituality gives us self-love and total faith, and this provides the basis for the upward spiral of experience that I described earlier. Without spirituality, we struggle because the ego will generate fearful thoughts and will not believe in anything other than its own agenda. This approach can produce results through sheer willpower and hard work, but it's totally different from the spiritual way. Self-will can actually be damaging because we're trying to force ourselves to do something that at some level we don't really want to do. Exercising willpower is effectively battling with self and is exhausting. I know this to be true because for many years I ran my whole life on willpower and it left me mentally shattered. Taking it easy and utilizing the law of attraction has been far less draining and far more enjoyable. However, anyone who tries to use the law of attraction from a position of ego is going to get nowhere fast and will quickly dismiss it as unworkable. Some may want positive results from the law of attraction before beginning to take spirituality seriously, but of course that's putting the cart before the horse. The way forward is to first choose spirituality and allow the cycle of the mind and the spectrum of spirit to work their magic. And then our loving thoughts will be focused and cohesive, and we will begin to attract that which we desire. What's interesting is that the things that a spiritual person desires will almost certainly be different from the sorts of things we previously may have coveted. Another important point to note is that the law of attraction is powerful and can't be fooled. We either use it with love or we don't get to use it effectively because it won't work at all well under selfish circumstances. You may not believe me, but that's entirely up to you. All I can say with total conviction is that it has worked for me. This book is but one example. One snag with the law of attraction is that we have to be careful what we wish for. There's no filter which overrides our thoughts and sends us something different and perhaps more helpful. We get what we think about, and that includes the bad stuff. Sometimes we get bad stuff even when we think we're trying to attract good stuff. My experience is that this happens a lot, particularly in the areas of need, want, and worry. It seems to be the case that what we resist persists. This may seem like a bit of a cruel trick, but it makes sense when we analyze it. If we are in a position of need or want, our minds tend to be preoccupied with that particular thought. For example, we may wish we had more money, and this desire may become our dominant thought. We may even pray that we somehow get access to more money. These types of thoughts are ego-based and not at all uncommon. The key point here is that the thought being transmitted is one of need and want, and the law of attraction will give us exactly what we're thinking about. We will be given more want. In other words, if we transmit thoughts of lack, then lack is precisely what we get. Instead of attracting a solution to our perceived problems, we attract more of the same problem. Now, this is bad enough news in itself, but it gets worse if we consider that subconscious thoughts also attract that which they focus on. It's quite conceivable that someone who grows up with a set of negative childhood beliefs and limitations programmed into his subconscious mind will go on to attract more of the same. Unless something happens to change these beliefs, the pattern may well be established for a lifetime. We all know people who seemingly suffer this way and are plagued with bad luck or self-sabotaging behaviour. They long to be happy, but somehow they're just unable to achieve it. The reason may well be the subconscious attraction of negative experiences. Well, this all sounds incredibly unfair, and you may well be feeling some irritation with me for trying to explain things in this way. My purpose is not to cause offence, but to add weight to the idea that the law of attraction is a real phenomena operating at levels beyond our comprehension. With this caveat, I would now like to look deeper at some of the other potential negative implications. We talked a bit about worry in the last chapter and how we project our concerns into the future. If the logic of need and want holds true, then presumably the same will be true of worry. If we transmit worry and stress into the world, that is what we're going to get. Worry will give us more things to worry about, and stress will provide yet more stress. we create a vicious circle of attracting more and more of the things into our lives that make us unhappy. Granted, not everything negative that happens in life is caused directly by our individual thinking, but the law of attraction is telling us that some of it is. Switching from negative thinking to positive thinking will at least stop the rot on some of our issues, and spirituality should generally make it much easier to deal with the other challenges of life when they come along. The problem is that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Some of us push ourselves even harder. Some of us turn to drink and drugs or other addictions, and some of us descend into depression and despair. And some of us, like me, do all these things and end up with serious mental health issues. Problems in life tend to push us further into ego and further from where the true solution lies. We try to battle it out and apply our own ingenuity and willpower, and the last thing we feel is loving and selfless. We become preoccupied with our own worries and fears and lose sight of all that is beautiful and precious. Life becomes an endless hamster wheel of effort just to stay alive, and inevitably many of us look elsewhere for comfort and relief. But this leads to more pain and suffering for ourselves and for those nearest and dearest, yet we keep doing it and keep thinking about it and keep attracting more and more and more misery. Well, this is one fairground ride I was very happy to eventually get off. Today I don't need anything, want anything, or worry about anything, and I rarely get stressed. Today I attract good things into my life because I choose to. I think positive thoughts and try to live with unconditional love, and consequently good things happen. It really is that simple. A final thing to mention at this stage is the potential implications of the law of attraction on sickness and disease. Once again, I'm keen not to tread on any toes here, but it is an obvious area to consider. We all know hypochondriacs who are forever getting sick, and we know positive healthy people who seem to be well almost all the time. There are countless people who get sick for no apparent reason, yet there are others who abuse themselves for years with no visible harmful effects. There are certainly many factors affecting our health, but there's no doubt that one of those factors is our thinking. The widespread evidence of the placebo effect makes this clear. The law of attraction supports these clinical findings simply by saying that if we think something will work positively for us, then it will. Conversely, if we spend our time thinking and worrying about illness and disease, that is what we're going to get. That doesn't mean that everyone who is sick has brought it upon themselves, but it does mean we're far better off thinking positive thoughts about our health and vitality than we are worrying about illness. Miraculous recoveries have been made in the presence of unconditional love, and such occurrences sit comfortably alongside the law of attraction. So the law of attraction is one great reason to seriously consider spirituality. We are far more than we think, but our thoughts really do matter. We can switch from negative to positive. We can move from ego to spirit. We can change the basis of our lives from fear to love. All of these changes are, of course, the same thing. When we do this, the law of attraction shifts from being the cause of our problems to the universal solution. This may sound ridiculously naive, but for me, the law of attraction explains in simple terms why spirituality works. Thought is creation, and creation is thought. We can experience heaven on earth by attracting peace and joy into our lives, and all we have to do is tune into the spiritual love that we already have within us. The next law to consider relates closely to the law of attraction and is known as the law of detachment. This law simply states, as we allow it, so it is. Or, to put it even more simply, let it be. This law draws the distinction between either being attached to or detached from any particular outcome. Basically, if our happiness depends on any particular outcome, we are attached to that outcome and to some extent controlled by it, whereas letting things unfold naturally allows us to be detached and free. You may well ask how anything can get done if we have no attachment to the outcome, and the answer is that we use the law of attraction. Thought and action can go hand in hand, so there's nothing to stop us making effort towards what we desire. But the minute we become attached to the outcome of our efforts, we're in trouble. The solution is to think loving thoughts and put in the effort, but to be totally detached from the outcome. This concept is completely at odds with my previous understanding of how the world worked, and it does take some getting used to. It sounds too good to be true, and this, I believe, prevents many people from embracing it. Logically, though, it makes sense. If we genuinely have no attachment to any outcome, we can never be disappointed. If we have no expectation, we will never have any resentment. If we have nothing to prove, we can never fail. This is how spirituality leads to peace of mind. This is where true serenity comes from. We focus on changing ourselves and let the world do whatever it chooses to do. We enjoy the serenity of having no attachments, and we have the courage to change only ourselves. Herein lies the wisdom that's been passed down through the millennia, but ignored by the vast majority of people, including me until recently. Attachment causes emotional pain, and resistance causes suffering. The law of detachment applies in all major areas of our lives. Materialism is probably the biggest mistake humankind has ever made, and it manifests as greed, pride, envy, dishonesty and theft. If we pin our happiness on material possessions, we create a monstrous attachment that will always lead to disappointment. However much we have, it will never be enough, because there will always be more to have and somebody else with more. Our ego minds hoard resources for fear of running out or of not having enough, when in reality all we need is sufficient resource to survive and be comfortable. Even our idea of what it takes to be comfortable rises with each new generation, and my view is that our expectations are in danger of becoming absurd. There's no issue with the enjoyment of material possessions, but the law of detachment highlights the risk of needing to have them. The trappings of life will keep us stuck in misery if we stay on that path. The spiritual way is to be grateful for what we have and to enjoy what is freely available. Surprising things tend to happen when we stop coveting material possessions. We have everything within that we need to manifest a beautiful life. Next on the list of attachments that disturb our peace of mind is the complex area of relationships. Many of us are either currently experiencing or seeking to experience codependent relationships. In other words, relationships based on some degree of need by one or both parties. As soon as neediness is involved, we have expectation and attachment, and this inevitably leads to all sorts of negative emotions. There's a chapter later in the book specifically about relationships, but for now the key point is that the law of detachment operates very strongly in this area. The idea of detachment within a relationship is again completely at odds with popular culture, and it sounds bizarre to say that we love someone but have no attachment to him or her. In truth, though, it's only when we truly love ourselves and are completely comfortable in our own skin and free of all attachments that we are then able to fully give our love to another. It's the giving of love within a relationship that really matters. We already have all the love we need within us. Parenting is a similar graveyard for negative emotions if we try to ignore the law of detachment. Our job as parents is to raise our children in a nurturing environment and hopefully pass on the skills and wisdom that will allow them to go on to live fulfilling lives as adults. The mistake we can make is to try to control them or to load them with expectations that inevitably lead to disappointment and conflict. There's also the risk of codependence between parents and children that can go way into adulthood and can stifle growth. It is difficult to let go of children and allow them to make their own mistakes, but the law of detachment helps us to see why it is so important to do so. If we remain emotionally attached to our children, resentment will inevitably arise. We can love them without needing them. We can love them unconditionally. This leads us to another way to look at attachment and detachment, which is to consider how they relate to love. Spiritual love, which is real love, comes from within us and is unconditional. Conversely, attachment is conditional love. We will love someone provided that they measure up and behave as we expect them to. If we need someone to behave within a predefined set of expectations, then we're not giving them unconditional love. We apply conditions and we get disappointed and hurt if these conditions are not met to our satisfaction. We then withdraw or withhold our love in order to teach them a lesson, and this causes unhappiness all around. We hold on to people for our sake rather than theirs, and we long to love them again, but we can't unless they change their ways. This probably sounds familiar, because I guess we've all done it at some point in our lives. This is why the law of detachment is so important. By detaching from outcomes, we're able to love unconditionally. By setting aside expectations and demands, we are able to give love in any situation because there's nothing to stop us. We don't need to withdraw or withhold love because there are no unmet conditions. There are no conditions, and hence there is only unconditional love. The law of detachment makes sense of the spiritual spectrum because we can't love unconditionally until we accept, surrender, suspend judgment, forgive, and live as love. The spiritual spectrum dissolves the cords that bind us to our attachments, and it sets us free to live in the moment, unaffected by what goes on around us. This brings us to the next important law, which is the law of impermanence. This law states that this too shall pass, or more simply, nothing lasts forever. We all know this to be true, yet it's surprising how often we mentally try to resist it. Nothing stays the same and everything continually changes, yet we want the good things to stay and the bad things to go. Good things come and go, and so too do bad things. This is simply the way of life, yet we want it to be different. We want the long, lazy summer days to last forever. We want that which makes us happy to be permanent and unchanging in our lives, and we grieve for the good old days when something happens to force change upon us. On the other hand, when circumstances and feelings are bad, we think they will be painful and challenging forever and will never change. The fact is that everything changes, yet either we don't want it to, or don't believe it ever will. Nothing lasts forever, and that includes every plant, insect, fish, bird and animal on the planet, including our own physical lives. Relationships, businesses, organizations, governments and institutions don't last forever either, nor do nations or civilizations. Everything is temporary and is continually changing, albeit sometimes very slowly. If we leave anything unattended for a period of time, it will gradually break down into its constituent parts through entropy. Landscapes change through the impact of erosion, weather systems, volcanic activity, and the activities of animal species and humankind. The planet itself is constantly moving due to its rotation and orbit around the sun. Our own bodies are constantly changing, with old cells being replaced by new ones on a daily basis, and body parts are slowly being renewed. Every atom and molecule is continually vibrating and moving in the quantum world. Every single thing, from the macro to the micro, is perpetually moving and changing. Yet we have a tendency to resist change. We sit within our ego minds, observing that change is endemic, yet wanting our little piece of the universe to stay still so that we can feel secure and comfortable. Resistance to change seems rather futile when we think about it in these terms. Speaking for myself, I now see my physical life as far less significant than I had previously thought, and I take life far less seriously than I used to. All those things that I used to think were so important suddenly seem rather trivial when I realize that none of it is going to last. And this is a good basis for humility. Life now seems like a fantastic game to play and enjoy, rather than a nightmare of challenges and the constant fear of failure. Obsessing about relationships or building success based on achievement and material wealth seems rather futile, because the fact is, none of it will last anyway. Planning and building a future is fine within the context of building a sandcastle on the beach, because we know full well that the wind and rain or tide will eventually knock it back down. Nothing in our lives is permanent, and we suffer when we think it should be different for us. The law of impermanence ties in nicely with the concept of living in the present moment, because right now is where the action is. True contentment does not lie at some future point where we may have what we think we need in order to enjoy life. The fact that everything is continually moving and changing amplifies the logic of making the most of every moment as it happens. We think we're in control of our lives, but in truth, anything could happen at any moment to fundamentally change our experience of life, including natural disaster, fire, accident, aggression, illness, financial meltdown, or even death. None of us really know what's going to happen from one moment to the next, although we all like to think that we do. What we do know is that things will change. Continual change is for certain, and the law of impermanence brings this fact sharply into focus. If change is the natural order of things, then surely we should be open to change too. This brings us to the law of emergence. This law states that potential will emerge in the right conditions, or more simply, everything is within. This law says we have all the potential within us that we could ever need, and that this potential will emerge when the conditions are right. The analogy used is that of an acorn, which appears unimpressive in itself, but contains the potential to grow into an oak tree, and then, through further seeding, into a forest of oak trees. An acorn will remain as an acorn until it finds the right natural conditions to grow, and then its inherent potential will gradually emerge. And so it is too that our potential as human beings will emerge and grow when we find ourselves in the right natural conditions. The problem is that most of us never experience the right conditions for growth because our egos keep us busy with the simple business of surviving and feeding our own limited sense of existence. The law of emergence tells us we all have the potential to grow into incredible human beings. All of us are capable of extraordinary acts of compassion, love, and healing, and have the potential to do far more than just survive and entertain ourselves. The acorn has little choice about whether or not it ends up in fertile soil, but we do. We can choose to place ourselves into the naturally fertile ground of spirituality and allow the growth to begin and the latent potential to emerge. We can choose to struggle for success, or we can let the law of emergence do the work for us. The way to grow is not to try to force things to happen, but to allow them to emerge. This leads us nicely to the law of abundance, which simply states that the universe is filled with abundance, or there is enough. This is another truth that we know to be universally true, but which we don't often apply in our own lives. There are enough natural resources on the planet for everyone to live comfortably, yet we have an inbuilt drive to compete for everything. However much we have of any given thing, we always seem to want more, either due to greed or jealousy over what others have. This is true of most individuals, but it's also true of organizations and nations. Basically, anyone or anything with an ego will think and behave from a position of fear and will perceive lack, despite the fact that there's no lack of anything. In fact, the illusory lack that we experience in the world is caused by us. We compete for resources and create winners and losers. The winners have far more than they need, and the losers suffer. According to the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report for 2012, an incredible 82.4% of the world's wealth is owned and controlled by just 8.1% of the population. And even more striking is the fact that 39.3% of the world is owned by an elite 0.5% of the people. Based on this information, if there were 200 people in the world and we had a giant pizza divided into 200 equal slices, instead of each of us having one slice each, we would have one person with 78 slices, 15 others with 6 slices each, 46 people with half a slice each, and a staggering 138 of us fighting over the remaining 9 slices. I don't want to make a political point here, but simply wish to highlight the distortions that our economic system has produced. It's human beings who have created the desperate inequality in the world. We have one person with 78 slices of pizza, while 138 people compete for 9 slices. And this is a sad reflection on humankind. To make matters even worse, the polarity is continuing to increase, with the rich taking an ever-increasing proportion of the total. There's little wonder that we have difficulty getting our heads around the law of abundance, because it seems to contradict reality. Well, despite presenting justification for rejecting the law of abundance, I do nevertheless personally believe it holds true. As we covered earlier, matter is energy vibrating at a multitude of different frequencies, and the universe has unimaginably vast amounts of energy. Universal abundance not only incorporates what we perceive to be physically available, but includes the potential to create more. You only have to think about the reproduction of animals or the growth of plants to accept that new resources can be created and multiplied at will. Money may not grow on trees, but food literally does. We perceive lack, but actually there is none. There's effectively no limit to the size of the pizza, just as there's no limit to the amount of love that could exist in the world. So too, there's no limit to any form of resource. Abundance may not yet be our personal experience, but it is a universal truth. The universe is filled with abundance, and there is more than enough. The law of abundance sits very nicely alongside the law of attraction, and brings truth to the notion that we get what we give. I always thought the world worked the other way around, and that we had to have enough of something before we could be in a position to give some away. The ego mind will tend to hoard resources and jealously guard its own interests. Granted, there is much charity and generosity in the world, as well as selfishness, but generally speaking, altruistic giving comes from a position of surplus, or at least adequacy. The law of abundance is telling us that there's more than enough of everything, and the law of attraction tells us that like attracts like, and that we get what we think about. These laws combine to point us to the wisdom that giving will lead to receiving. When we give, we create the feeling of abundance and attract more of the same. The more we give, the more we get. As we give to the world, so the world will give to us. You contrast this to the greedy behaviour of hoarding more than we need. Being selfish and miserly comes from a position of greed and insufficiency, and likewise will attract more of the same lack. Generosity and gratitude attract abundance into our lives. The results may not be immediately apparent, but this is the way the world works. Abundance does not arise due to circumstances, hard work, or good fortune. Abundance comes to those who give something to the world first. Well, this may be old news for some, but for me this was pretty revolutionary thinking. Basically, I was faced with the concept that was the opposite of what I had previously believed. If we want more of something in our lives, the easiest way to achieve it is to start giving it away. This applies to all aspects of our lives, both physical and emotional. Giving is good because it transmits abundance into the world, and the universe responds by giving us more. The more we give, the more we get. Not only is this a logical conclusion from the fusion of these two spiritual laws, but it's also been my personal experience. Generosity of time, resources, consideration and love has paid handsome and unexpected dividends in my new life. Giving with the expectation of receiving will fall foul of the law of detachment, but giving just for the sake of giving brings great reward. In fact, it's a double reward because we experience the joy of giving and we receive more of that which we gave away. The great thing about this aspect of spirituality is that we can easily put it to the test. When we start acting with genuine love and generosity in all aspects of our lives, we will be amazed by what happens. It will be tempting to think that everything is just coincidence, but close observation will reveal that positive motives and actions will bring about apparently unrelated positive results. Once we understand the power of giving, we must also acknowledge the importance of receiving. If giving is good for us, then it's also good for others. Allowing others to give freely to us is therefore a loving act, because it ultimately results in their receiving more. We tend to see things in terms of transactions these days, with favours, gifts and kindnesses being traded as if there's an underlying obligation. In truth, giving and receiving are loving acts that benefit all concerned. There's no need for us to balance the books or settle imaginary debts. Everyone is a winner, and as they say, it's the thought that counts. There's more truth than we may realise in the statement that it's the thought that counts. The next law to cover is the law of attention, which states that energy flows where attention goes. This law has similarities to the law of attraction, but the key point with the law of attention is that the more attention we give to anything, the more likely it is to happen. The more we focus on something, the more likely it is to manifest. Attention in this context includes thoughts, words and actions. It's crucial for us not only to focus our attention on what we desire, but to give it as much attention as we possibly can. The issue here is that our attention is limited because we all have a lot going on in our lives. Spreading ourselves too thinly across a range of activities may seem like achieving good balance in our lives, but the downside is that limited attention on any one thing will produce limited results. This is not a difficult concept to grasp, because we all know instinctively that it's true. We all know about the weakness of jack of all trades, master of none, and it was Gary Player who said, "The harder I practice, the luckier I get," and so it is. The law of attention produces great skill, provided we put it into practice. Unfortunately, the law of attention can produce negative results as well as positive ones. When we give our attention to fear, worry and stress, this is what we get. We covered this earlier, but now we see that the more energy we give to negative thinking, the more negativity we will attract into our lives. Cautious planning is fine, but constantly fretting over worst-case scenarios and talking endlessly about fears, worries and problems simply draws these energies into our experience. We get what we focus on, and the more we focus on problems, the more we get. As children, we're told that we should be careful what we wish for, and now it seems that there's far more wisdom in these words than perhaps we previously thought. Alternatively, when we pay attention to the good things in life and wish everyone well in all circumstances, we focus our energies on positive outcomes, and this in turn transforms our lives. There are a couple of other issues to consider with the law of attention. Firstly, the brain struggles to cope with the massive amount of incoming information from our senses, and we cope by being selective and by pushing some of our processing into the subconscious mind where habits form. Over time, this can lead us to habitually focus our thoughts and actions in negative ways without seeming to consciously choose to. And secondly, we diminish our attentive powers when we're stressed, tired or under the influence of alcohol or drugs. This lethal combination of negative habit and a reduced ability to focus attention on positive thoughts can leave us feeling that there's no way out of the current life circumstance. I know this to be true because I've been in this situation myself, and it's a very dark and depressing state of mind. The good news is that there is a way out, but it does require positive intention and action. This brings us to the final law that I want to cover here, which is the law of intention. This law states that universal energy supports the highest good, or more simply, fortune favours the brave. Our intentions can come from ego or from spirit, and the law of intention tells us that the other spiritual laws will work far more powerfully for us when our intentions are selfless rather than selfish. An honest, kind, supportive and loving intention is going to invoke a strong response, whereas selfishly using the law of attraction to try to get more money or a better car is going to be far less effective. Good intentions will always be far more powerful than devious, manipulative or questionable intentions. Our true underlying intentions are fully transparent. There's no way around it, however clever we may try to be. Yes, people do create wealth and power through selfish intention, but this is mainly done using willpower, manipulation and exploitation. And all this does is reinforce the ego. A life based on ego is a life of fear, even if it's just fear of losing what we have already amassed. We all have the choice to live in ego, but a life based on fear, discontent and anxiety is a poor cousin to a life of joy, love and serenity, whatever the materialistic backdrop may be. Our intentions speak volumes about who we choose to be. When our intentions come from the basis of love, we can have faith that our dreams will come true. In numerology, the number 7 represents the seeker of truth, so I think I'll stick with this selection of 7 spiritual laws. There are many others that can be explored, but I believe that these 7 give us a clear framework for how to make the most of our lives. My summation of these spiritual laws would be to say that we can attract anything that we like into our lives as long as we have honourable intentions and give attention to what we desire, and provided that we maintain detachment from any specific outcome. Everything in the world is impermanent and will always change, but the universe is abundant with all we could ever possibly imagine, and our true potential will emerge once we let go of ego and change the basis of our lives from fear to love.